everyone. Welcome back to Book Talk Tuesdays. I'm Miss Jessica, and I'm a youth librarian at the Chelsea District Library, and I have my coworker here with me today.
Hi, my name is Matt Jenson, and I am the CDL Tech 2, Computer Tech 2. I think that's my official position, but I love literature and talking about books, so here I am.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, so much for joining me. And you might notice the very cool, beautiful background that Matt has today, and that's because we are sharing all about outdoor adventure and survival stories. And I was inspired by one of my favorite books in 5th grade, Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. We're sharing all kinds of books all about outdoor survival and adventure. If you haven't read Hatchet, it's an excellent choice. I would say it still stands up to the test of time for sure. It feels a little bit dated in some parts, but the story itself is amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of like the woods haven't changed, so it's still pretty good. Yeah,
exactly. That side of the mountain is still there.
Yeah.
So the first one I have is Wild River by Rodman Philbrick, who is an author. Matt, you might recognize that name. He has won, I think, one Newbery honor way back when, kind of around when Hatchet was published, actually.
I've certainly shelved his books.
Yes.
I know that.
Yes. And this book really had me on the edge of my seat just from the very start. There's a very short prologue, about a paragraph, that introduces the characters. And then you start the first chapter, you get introduced right away to everything that's going on. It's about a kid named Daniel, and the whole story is told from his perspective. So you get to know his thoughts and how he's feeling really, really well. And he's with a group of campers, and they're on a whitewater rafting trip. And they have 2 adult guides with them. Well, the guides decide that even though their satellite phone isn't working, and even though they haven't told anyone about the major change in plans, they're going to raft down a river they usually don't go on. And so that's called foreshadowing. And we know right from the start that things are not going to go the way that they are expected to. And it definitely does not. Daniel finds himself shaken awake in the middle of the night by one of the guides. The dam at the top of the river has broken, and because there's a big storm, and so a huge flood is headed their way. The guides get the kids up to the top of the bluff overlooking the river, but they are swept away. So it's just 5 kids, 1 pack of food, and nobody knows where they are. Help is not coming because they were not expected to be on this river, and they've got to get themselves to safety, keep themselves fed and hydrated in the wilderness. They don't really know how to do any of that. And not only do they need to figure out how to physically survive, they also have to learn how to work together. And these kids are all very, very different from each other. This is kind of a special camping trip, and they don't really know why they were selected. But as the story moves along, it becomes more and more clear. And Daniel himself has a lot going on in his personal life. His dad is bipolar, and so they're really, really struggling with mental health for a lot of different reasons in their household. And he just kind of can't stop thinking about that, even while he's trying to keep himself alive with these other kids. So this book was less than 200 pages, and so much happens in it. It actually reminded me of a Gordon Corman book where the action just keeps happening. Every time you end a chapter, you're like, well, I'll just read one more. I got to see what happens next. So really good one. If you like a fast-paced adventure, Wild River is a great one for that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. My first book that I'm going to talk about is called Talent for Trouble by Natasha Ferrant. I really loved this one. I sort of have a soft spot in my heart for like quirky kids going off to a magical school, a la Harry Potter kind of a thing. This isn't quite like that. It's very much like based in reality and not like sort of a wizarding world or whatever, but it has a lot of those same sort of like magical realism elements, which I really liked a lot. So there's kind of 3 major characters. There's Alice, Jesse, and Fergus. Alice is really sort of the focus of the book. The book starts and she's with her aunt and her dad. Her aunt is named Patience and her dad is named Barney. The sort of crux of the book is that Alice, her mother, has passed away in the very recent past, and she is just reeling from it still. She's misses her greatly, and she never really realized before how much her mother sort of kept her dad on track, or like was like a stabilizing influence for them. And so because of that, she's traveling to this boarding school where her aunt has decided that she will be better taken care of than by her sort of wacky father. On the way, she meets a young man named Jesse, and he has this group of brothers, and sort of his real thing in the book is that he just wants to be great at something. He feels like he's always overshadowed by his brothers, and he also at the same time is very bad at recognizing what an exceptional young man he is.
Got a little Ron Weasley syndrome going on there.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right, actually. Yeah. And so when they get to the school, she sort of accidentally meets early on a young man named Fergus, who is kind of a jerk. He trips her sort of for no reason, and then because of that, he's sort of assigned to be her like guide for like the rest of the year as like his like consequence. The story sort of is based on this idea of like trying to find your talent, trying to find like what it is that you're good at, what you want, what you like. And this school is very good at that. And in the meantime, Alice has this sort of like burning desire to get in touch with her dad, which she just like can't do for most of the story. And when it comes to this thing called the Great Orienteering Challenge, the three of them team up and they decide that they're going to go off track to help Alice get to her dad. And crazy adventure ensues, and they have all kinds of troubles and difficulties, but they also become very, very close. And it's sort of a story about friendship dressed up in a story about survival, which a lot of these books are. But it's great. It's just sort of whimsical and weird and funny, but also just very heartwarming to see three people taking care of and caring about each other in a difficult situation.
And where does that book take place? It's not in
Scotland.
It's in Scotland. Okay, that's what I thought. And what I like about both of our books so far is that, unlike Hatchet, the main characters have friends with them. They're not alone.
Yeah.
They have some other people they can depend on, even if those relationships and friendships are a little bit rocky. And that's the case too for my next one. It's called Distress Signal by Mary Lambert. And there are actually a lot of similarities between this one and Wild River. The main character is a girl named Lavender. Her class is on a big field trip to the Chiricahua National Park, which is in Arizona, kind of in the desert. And Lavender's been having a really, really tough year. Her ex-best friend, Marisol, is now hanging out with Rachel. Rachel is kind of a mean girl, and things are just really not going well for her. On the hike, the class accidentally veers off the trail. If you learn nothing else from these books, stay on the path.
Stay on the course.
Stay on the
Go
trail.
on that course.
Don't wander away. Lavender does ham radio as a hobby, and she actually she brought a radio on the trip with her, and she hears through the radio that there's a flash flood headed directly toward where she and her classmates are hiking. And the students all get caught up in the flood. When it's all over, it's just Lavender, Marisol, Rachel, and then this other kid named John. They have one pack of food and supplies. They've got to figure out where they are, where they need to be, how to survive. Unlike Daniel in Wild River, Lavender actually has some survival skills. So she's really good with her ham radio. I'll let you read the book to see if that survives the flood or not. But she knows some other things. So she knows how to signal SOS, which you can do on the radio, or you can do it with a flashlight and lots of other things too. And she even knows how to get water from a cactus for hydration. Ends up with a few prickers in her hands for sure. Just like in Wild River too, one of the biggest struggles the kids face is trying to get along with each other and helping each other. Lavender spends a lot of time trying to convince Marisol that Rachel is actually the problem, the mean girl, but the more she talks through it, the more she comes to realize that the problem isn't maybe Rachel so much, but more like Lavender and Marisol are just starting to develop different interests, and that's okay that they spend time apart. So she's kind of working through a lot of that friendship stuff too. There's also a terrifying bear attack. I had no idea there were black bears in the desert, and now I know, and you do not want to run into one. So that's in this book too. It's another super, super fast-paced adventure, and it was pretty hard to put this one down as well. I was actually, the survival stuff was scary enough, but I was really, really invested in the friendship story in this one.
Speaking of the desert, my next book has to do with the desert as well. It's called 96 Miles by J.L. Esplin. And it actually, one of the things that drew me to it is that we've talked about him before, but a former professor of mine, Gary Schmidt, did a little blurb for the front cover of it, and I was like, "Ooh, perfect! I love Mr. Schmidt, Professor Schmidt. He's great. So if he likes it, I probably will too." And boy, did I! The way that the story starts is two young men, John and Stu, brothers, who are, I believe, the ages were like, I'm not sure exactly how old John is. I think he's like 14 or 15, and then Stu is like 11. It's just difficult to have siblings that are that age. They want to argue a lot. They don't necessarily like each other all the time. They get on each other's nerves, etc. Anyway, so they live in a very remote part of Nevada, in a very small town. And their dad is sort of big, like, survivalist. He's all about being like prepared and being like self-sufficient, and it's like making sure that he can take care of himself, and he's done everything that he can to raise his boys to be the same way. His father works for a company that sends him places occasionally, and so he has to leave for a work trip. The day after that happens, there's a huge power grid outage. Fortunately, they're not very worried about it because their dad has just like super prepared them for like dealing with this, and they have food, and they have water, they have a generator, they have all the stuff that they need to live in relative comfort. They can't necessarily play on the Xbox much, but they'll be all right. But the power outage just sort of drags on and drags on day after day, and it's very worrisome. And then the worst thing that you can sort of imagine happens, and they sort of, because of their preparedness, they attract the attention of some sort of nasty people who decide stupid grown-ups. Those people decide that maybe John and Stu don't deserve the supplies, or they don't need all of the supplies, but instead of just taking their extras, they take everything, and the boys are left with just some survival packs, and that doesn't leave them with much. But they come up with this plan to sort of trek to a place called Brighton Ranch, and they know that they have friends there. They're like family friends, and those friends are also very prepared. The problem is Brighton Ranch is 96 miles away, and they have food and water for about a 2-day hike. And this is definitely longer than that. It's at least a 3-day hike. There's all these sort of calculations that go into it, of like, how much water do you need a day? How much food do you need a day? And then another setback, like right off the bat, they meet two other kids, Cleverly, who's a young woman about John's age, and Will, who's a young boy a little bit younger than Stu. And they're in really rough shape too. And John and Stu have to decide, like, are we going to try to help these other two people and, make the hike with us, or what's going to happen? And let me just tell you, I just described maybe the first like 2 chapters to you. So it's there's a lot. This book is great. I really loved it.
That sounds like such a good book. And if Gary Schmidt says it's good, that means
right?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite authors.
That guy's a Newbery winner. He knows what he's talking about.
Yep. I'm definitely going to check that one out. My last book is called The Canyon's Edge by Dusty Bowling. And yes, that's her real name. It's not a pseudonym or a pen name.
It's a great name.
It's her real name.
Yeah.
So I didn't apparently read the description of this book too closely when I first picked it up, because it actually is a little bit heavier than I thought it was going to be. I knew as a survival book that there'd be some really tough parts to read, but it hit me a lot harder than I thought it was going to. So it's about a girl named Nora, and she is living through an experience I would not wish on anybody in the world. About a year before the book starts, it was her birthday, and her mother was killed in a really tragic shooting incident. And so for this year, for a year later, her father has decided to sort of help her through this and to sort of take her mind off of things, just give her something totally different to think about. He's going to take her on a hiking trip to explore a slot canyon in Arizona. And I want to show you the cover of this book, because even though this is an illustration, but this is kind of what they mean, where it's like a really, really thin canyon going through 2 very, very tall formations of rock. So that's where they're hiking. And there's a flash flood. It's the common theme of all my books. There's a flash flood. And Nora's dad is swept away from her along with most of their supplies. So she's on her own. So she's facing dehydration, scorpions, snakes, all the physical stuff that a lot of these other characters have been facing in these other books. But that's not really the worst of it for Nora. She has PTSD from her experience a year ago. And she's felt like for the past year, she's been haunted by what she calls the beast. And it feels like on this trip, now that she's stuck out here all by herself, that the beast might catch up to her. I haven't read a book about a child experiencing PTSD in this way before, especially one written for kids. So it was just, her writing is so good, I couldn't put it down. I needed to keep reading and seeing what was going to happen. This one reminded me the most like Hatchet, because it's just Nora by herself. And you really get a sense of her innermost feelings and thoughts and experiences and how she's handling everything. The book is written in verse, which is poems. So you can see each chapter is its own poem. They read really, really fast because of that. But the poems are also very intense and make you feel like you're there living Nora's experiences. Just like Hatchet, I also think everybody should read this book. Kids, teens, adults, everyone should read The Canyon's Edge. So it's a good one. But you're going to have to be like really in the mood to read a book that's going to make you feel things. So
yeah, it sounds so intense. Again, it's like, yeah, this is a survival book, but it's actually like, this is a book about dealing with grief, and it's whoa, that's intense. I don't know if this happened on purpose or not, but I feel like our books have like very much sort of mirrored each other in some ways.
Yeah.
My last book, called Alone, by Megan Freeman, is also a novel in verse about a young woman who's dealing with these like very difficult circumstances that she finds herself. The main character of Alone is a young woman named Maddie, and she lives in Millerville, Colorado. And there's this sort of like unexplained threat that happens. It's not like important to the novel really, but what ends up happening is that Maddie sort of plans this ill-advised sneaky hangout with her friends at her grandparents' like summer home in Colorado. Basically, what ends up happening is that her two friends can't make it, but in the middle of the night, this sort of unexplained threat happens and everybody in the town is evacuated, but she doesn't know that that's happening. And she thinks, oh, maybe I'll get in big trouble if they find me here alone when I'm supposed to be at home. Turns out that she would have been better off getting in a little bit of trouble because she is completely alone, and the large portion of the like Western United States gets like evacuated to the east, and
she's really alone.
She's like super alone, and it again, it's sort of like Hatchet in that she's just by herself, but she does end up finding this really amazing dog named George, who's this Rottweiler of her neighbors. At the very beginning of the book, one of her brothers is talking to her about a book report that he has to do on the novel Isle of the Blue Dolphin. I don't know if you ever read that.
Oh yeah.
It's great story. Another very, very good book about survival. And his book report has to do with which of these is the most difficult thing to deal with when you're in this situation. Is it finding food and water, like creating shelter, or being alone? And she says, well, without food and water, you'd be dead, right? So obviously that's the most important thing, or the most difficult thing. But she ends up reading her brother's book report after he's gone because he misses her, or she misses him. And he says, I think maybe secretly being alone the whole time would be the most difficult. Like, obviously you need food and water and you need shelter, but being alone is very hard. And Maddie realizes that he's right, by sort of having to do it for a long time. Actually, that's one of the craziest things, is you believably follow Maddie through 3 years of being all alone.
3 years?
Yeah. And like, I totally believe it. It's like written so well.
I gotta read this book. I gotta find out what happens to Maddie. What was this thing that happened? Like, does she ever see another person again? I gotta know. I gotta read this book.
I can't tell you. I won't tell you secrets.
Well, Matt, thanks so much for joining me. I have to let you know, this is our last Book Talk Tuesdays for now. We have a lot of really, really fun things planned for summer reading, which means I'm going to be really busy. And I'm not going to be able to record any more Book Talk Tuesdays, but I might pop onto our library's social media from time to time to give some book recommendations or show what's on our new shelves. And you can always email or call the librarians to get recommendations, or to get in touch with me to find out more about these books. So you can call the library at 734-475-8732, extension 219, or you can email ref at chelseadistrictlibrary.org. Thanks for watching.